Hi everyone, it's John. It's Tuesday, so I wanted to bring everyone another video. Instead of a book review this week, I thought I would get maybe a little bit ahead on showing you some of the, oh goodness, probably 80 or 100 books I've managed to get in the past 4 to 6 months or so. And I haven't shown you any recent books for a while. So I wanted to maybe start interspersing some more videos like this in with regular book reviews, just to maybe get ahead instead of doing, say, 4 or 10 videos just showing you new books. I thought that maybe every time I could just show you 10 books that I've recently gotten my hands on, and I have 10 here with maybe a slight emphasis on American history and history of science. So, the first one is a book I remember seeing quite a bit, but never read. It is by it's already 16 years old. It came out in 2003. It's Einstein's Clocks, Poincaré's Maps, and that is the Henri Poincaré of mathematics fame. You probably know more from Poincaré's theorem than you do his map making. But this book is by Peter Gallison, as you can see at the bottom there. And I got this book mostly because I love learning about the history of science and chronology, how it's tied into culture. But also, Peter Gallison is a fantastic historian of science who kind of, depending on the book he's writing, can bridge a lot of gaps between really popish history of science and more scholarly stuff. This is a bit more on the pop side, but he does both rather well. Peter Gallison is a historian of science at Harvard, by the way. I believe he's still there. Two of these books, I think, I purchased because I saw them on graduate level syllabi in either history or history of the social sciences or something like that. And this is one of those. I've never heard of the author and I've never heard of the book, but sometimes I'm the kind of person who just trolls a graduate level syllabus for things to read. So, this was on there. The Discovery of the Asylum, Social Order and Disorder in the New Republic by David Rothman. Is it J? Yeah, David J. Rothman. This apparently, from just a cursory look at the book, is about. It's kind of like if you're familiar with the work of the Foucault and the birth of the asylum. It's social measures of control and how, I don't know how, if he talks about specifically how psychiatry was used, but how psychiatric hospitals developed in early America, specifically in the, I want to say he's looking mostly at the time leading up to the Jacksonian era. So whereas Foucault would probably look mostly at Europe, this is a look at the United States. And I don't think Rothman here is dealing as abstractly and abstrusely as someone like Foucault is. This is probably more a work of general history. But it's interesting to maybe read or think about the two, at least in tandem, and compare and contrast the development of the two. Of course, hospitals like that were around much earlier in Europe, since Europe is obviously much older than the United States. Next up is one of my history of science finds. It is. When did he write this? Let's see. I'm just curious to find out. This is 2 volumes bound in one, by the way. And this was originally published in 1995, but it seems to have been written in, I want to say, the 50s. But, I mean, Roger Bacon isn't going to change much in the 800 years between when he lived in 1955. So, this is the history of science from Augustine to Galileo by A.C. Crombie, the yet another well-known historian of science. The first volume takes you from the science in Western Christendom until the 12th century Renaissance, into the reception of Greco-Arabic science in Western Christendom, the system of scientific thought in the 13th century, etc. And then volume 2 starts out with the later Middle Ages. So 1 is, I guess, kind of what you would call the Dark Ages. With Augustine, I don't know how much time he's going to spend on going back that early, but the second book is maybe, say, 1400, 1500 onward. This is the other book that I found on a graduate syllabus. This is Carl N. Degler's In Search of Human Nature, The Decline and Revival of Darwinism in American Social Thought. Degler was a professor at Stanford, I believe, and this particular book is about the changing topography of the way that Americans have thought about hereditary explanations for behavior, and especially things like intelligence. So, for example, if you are familiar with Stephen Jay Gould's book, The Mismeasure of Man, in which he charts the sometimes odd way that we have measured intelligence, sometimes misinformed ways that we've tried to measure such a concept. It's changed dramatically over the years, and sometimes we've had this idea that it's more hereditarian, that it has more to do with genes. Other times that it has more to do with culture and what surrounds us. So it really gets at the heart of the nature-nurture debate. And again, the history of American social thought is, as someone interested in intellectual history, is really fascinating stuff. So maybe I can report back and tell you all about it. Next up is a slim little volume, by far the oldest book I'm going to show you today. It's the Travels of Sir John Mandeville, the 14th century explorer. And this just tells you, it's only about 200 pages or so, this just tells you about his travels during the, I want to say, mid-14th century. He published this in 1356. So just a nice little, thin, inexpensive Penguin Classics version. Next is a book on human origins. The Discovery of Human Origins. It's by Roger Lewin, yet another popularizing historian of science, especially on biology and anthropology, especially. This is called Bones of Contention, and it's called the subtitle there is Controversies in the Search for Human Origins. And I think what it is a bunch of, I don't know if it's essays or just a sustained argument in book form, but it is a bunch of chapter-length pieces on a lot of topics in early human archaeology. So I found this as at a really great price when I was looking through probably another syllabus of some kind. These, I think, all of these I found at a local library book sale. This is A. Scott Berg's biography of Woodrow Wilson, which I can tell you almost nothing about, other than the fact that it is a substantial biography of over 800 pages if you look at the notes and the in-papers and the bibliography and everything. Next, I can tell you a bit more about the name and the face on the cover caught my attention. Any of you math people out there probably, if you don't recognize the face, you almost certainly recognize the name right here. This is a book I did not know existed until I saw it in the library. This is The Fractalist, Memoir of a Scientific Maverick, apparently inspired by John McCain, by Benoit Mandelbrot. And there is his handsome little mug right there. I flipped through it, and it is, despite being put out by quite a good publisher, I think it's put out by Pantheon. I read some of it, and the chapters are quite short, and there's a lot of pictures, and a lot of the chapter subheadings are things like Max Dilbrook and the Birth of Molecular Biology, or Professors Lepince, Ringoulet, and Patrier. So apparently this wasn't too edited by someone at Pantheon who went through this and said, okay, let's try to make this a bit more readable and interesting for the popular audience. But for those of you who might be unfamiliar with Mandelbrot, he was the mathematician in, I want to say probably the 50s, maybe the early 60s, who did really pioneering work in an area called fractal geometry. And if you don't know what fractals are, they are self-iterating patterns. So, for example, let's see, what can I show you? Right there. You can see that pattern repeats itself on each individual level. So, for example, there, but if you were to zoom in on each individual part, there's a repetition of the entire thing. So, and there's several examples. Maybe I can show you one more. Yeah, there's maybe a better example that you've seen right there in the middle. So this is an autobiography, I guess, of the guy who really invented that field of mathematics. Another library book. This is just something I saw on the shelves. Realized that I don't think I have a biography of this person. Especially the biography of I Want, which is by Frank Barlow or Barclay. His last name is escaping me at the moment. He's a famous medievalist, but this is a biography of Thomas à Becket, a warrior priest rebel by John Guy. This came out from Random House in 2012, and in pretty much mint condition. So last but not least, I only recognized when I actually got home that I already had a copy of this in hardback. But this is a really quite substantial book on the subject. And I don't know if it was this book that won the Bancroft Prize or some other book by Sean Wilentz. But this is called The Rise of American Democracy from Jefferson to Lincoln. And it may not look terribly thick, but it's actually well over 1,000 pages. And this is by Sean Wilentz, who I think is, if I'm not mistaken, a professor at I think Princeton, but I could be wrong. It's got blurbs by Gordon Wood, Eric Foner, the who's who of American history. So I've never read a book by Sean Wilentz before, and I love, in-depth, critical, substantial studies of relatively narrow periods of history. Jefferson to Lincoln, that's what, 60 years we're talking about, so maybe a quarter of American history, and looking at how the democracy was shaped over that period. That sounds like my jam. So maybe I can read this 1,000-page book and get back to you about it. If any of these sound interesting, if you've read any of them or own any of them and have thoughts or comments or opinions, go ahead and let me know. I would be glad to get in touch and say hello and respond to you. So if you have any questions for me, leave them below, and hopefully next week I can get to you with a fully written review, or maybe I can just show you 10 more books. If anyone has a preference, let me know. I will see you guys next week. Bye.